Those of you signed on, thanks for joining. The webinar will begin in a few minutes.
Even though we're in pre-game mode, we're looking forward to having a great conversation. If you have questions as the presentations go on, please type those in right away. Megan will sort through them and we'll try to do our best to answer them. This is kind of a coast-to-coast broadcast today. We got Megan coming from New York State, and I'm all the way out in California. We're just wrapping up the International Dairy Foods Association Dairy Forum that had record attendance out here. Over 1,200 people registered. Certainly a lot of positive discussion on the whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act. Well, the first point is we got that into law. Now the hard work begins is, we got to be able to get milk into schools in the new school year. We won't really get anything done this school year, but we also have to have school systems ability to pay for the whole milk with extra butterfat in it. So positive project for the industry.
Okay, it's noon, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelsey Lefebvre, and welcome to the 2026 Dairy Outlook webinar. Before we begin today, I'd like to offer a few technology tips to keep in mind while you're viewing today's webinar. First, all attendees are muted throughout the presentations. Once in a while, it's a good idea to tap your mouse so your screen does not go to sleep during the presentations. And there will be a time at the end for questions and answers. Questions can be submitted at any point during the presentation. To do this, click on the question mark button in the right side of your screen, and that will expand a text box where you can then type in your question. And then lastly, a recording of today's webinar and presentation materials will be available at farmcrediteast.com as well as on our YouTube channel. And a quick disclaimer, this information is presented in good faith and is not intended for investment, tax, or legal advice. I will now be handing it over to my colleague Megan to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you all for joining us today for our Dairy Outlook webinar. My name is Megan Clancy, and I'm a dairy and livestock risk management specialist here at Farm Credit East, and I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Corey Geiger. Corey is a lead economist for dairy production and processing in CoBank's Knowledge Exchange Research Division. Prior to joining CoBank, he made a career of assessing the information and leadership needs of the dairy industry as managing editor of Hort's Dairyman magazine, where he headed the editorial team of 10 and its foreign language editions as the publication's 7th lead editor since 1885. He has deep dairy knowledge ranging from policymaking to international trade to federal milk marketing orders. He was elected the 65th president of the Holstein Association USA, and he serves on the board of directors for the World Dairy Expo. Corey is also an award-winning author of 2 books and owns a portion of his 6th-generation family farm in Wisconsin. And with that, Corey, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Megan. And if Kelsey can give me the opportunity to share screen, that would be great.
should be able to select a screen, but let me know if that's not working.
It is not working.
Okay, let's try again. Okay, anything now?
There we go. And I'm going to get my slides up. And I would ask the audience kindly, or Kelsey, can you see my presentation?
Yes, yep, looks good.
Excellent. Happy to be here with Farm Credit East and Horizon Ag and all its great dairy customers. We're going to take you on a journey here in the next 40 minutes on the wonderful world of dairy. One of the things I like to start out and level set here, dairy is the largest category in retail this past year. If you look at year-end sales in 2025, it was an $80.3 billion category. So it's even larger if you put wine, beer, and all the spirits together. Alcohol sales are number 2 next to dairy. And when you think about it, dairy has a number of positive things going here. We're up 3.2% when compared to 2024. And dairy is the world's largest refrigerated supply chain. Once we milk our cows, the milk is cooled to the processing plant. Almost all the dairy products are chilled on the way to stores and in consumer households. That's one of the reasons that dairy is the largest category. Then there's the simple fact that outside of eggs, dairy is the only commodity out there that we're continually bringing product to the processing plant. Almost every other thing else out there, when you think of grains or beef, pork, poultry, those would all be one-time harvests. We're going to go through 4 sections today: production and processing, some insight on consumer demand, cattle inventory, and then looking ahead. Let's get started with production and processing. Through our entire lifetime, if milk production was up 4%, butterfat and protein was up about the equivalent because component levels were not changing in the US milk supply. And in fact, from 1960 to 2010, butterfat in the milk held in this tiny little window of 3.65% to 3.69%. Then everything began to change. December's preliminary milk production came out, so we could do some calculations here. The green bars are what has happened in the past 15 years. You can see what you want to take away here is that milk has gotten more nutrient dense. Milk production was up 18.4% in the past 15 years, protein up 27.7%, butterfat up a whopping 34.6%, and then the combined protein and butterfat category was up 31.5%. So we're looking at a spread here of about 13 percentage points in the difference between gains of protein and butterfat versus milk production. This is a game changer. The pace of change is quickening. This is federal milk marketing order data. It's every other year. So protein is on the left of butterfat is on the left of your screen. Protein is on the right. And we have that swoon in the middle of the year, June, July, August, where heat stress does cause components to go down. But the one key takeaway here, the distance between those lines is getting larger. That means we're accelerating the pace of change here on milk components. And this is so important because 90% of the US milk supply is priced on multiple component pricing, with the 2 top components, butterfat and protein, being 90% of that value. The only places in the country that this wouldn't apply is the Appalachian, Southeast, Florida, and Arizona milk sheds. This is looking at milk production data the last 3 years. If the bars are below the 0 mark, that means milk production didn't grow. And you could see late in 2025, we started having a lot of growth in milk production, primarily driven by more dairy cows. We had 212,000 more dairy cows in December compared to the same time last year. But when you overlay the growth in milk components, again, components being butterfat and protein, they are outpacing milk production. And for that stretch from 2023 to 2024, milk components were growing, even though the liquid portion of milk was not growing. What does this mean to a dairy processor? What does this mean to a dairy farmer? This here is a cheddar cheese yield formula. And again, our entire lifetimes, we learned that 100 pounds of milk made 10 pounds of cheese. That was the correct answer till about 2010. And then everything began to change. So in 2010 to 2025, we've had 15.8% growth in cheese yield, again on a cheddar cheese formula. And in 2025, 100 pounds of milk yielded 11.6 pounds of cheese. It speaks to the efficiencies of our dairy cows and the milk coming off of our dairy farms. Last week, I was speaking in Georgia and Florida, and I said out loud, the protein levels in our beverage milk are growing. And that really wasn't the case either pre-2010. But if you look at protein at the federal orders here just finished up for 2025, we collectively as a U.S. dairy industry, we shipped 3.34% milk protein for a growth rate of 9.6%. What does this mean to a consumer? It means there's an extra gram of protein per serving of milk. And this is set at 240 milliliters, or what most of us would call 8 ounces. Here is multiple component pricing from 2020 through the beginning here of 2026. You can see protein was in the lead. If you had a pair of NASCARs here, it was the leading NASCAR in 2020, 2021, and early 2022. Then the butterfat boom came. We had $3 per pound butter on the CME. But now with butter being strong, and when I look at the market situation here, we do not have a demand problem when it comes to dairy products. 10 of the 12 major categories are up. Butter sales are up too, butter the product. What we have here is an oversupply right now, particularly of butterfat. That is not the case with protein. Whey protein isolates are as strong as ever at 12.50 plus a pound. What's a whey protein isolate? It's protein at 90% or higher protein content. Dairy processing expansion is moving quickly. This slide says 11 billion, but from reports I've heard here at International Dairy Foods Dairy Forum, that's just concluding, that number has certainly gone over 12 billion. Not every plant investment does get announced. So this is a map of that plant investment. If you're in the New York milk shed here, there's been a lot of expansion plans. Not all of that is online. Certainly the Fairlife plant's coming online soon. Chobani will be down the road. But New York has seen more dairy plant investment in the last 3 to 4 years than any region of the country. And that speaks to the demand for milk and also accessing the East Coast consumer market. It's going to present opportunities for our dairy farmers. We're going to move into consumer demand here. This is an open-ended question from Gallup. And the question is, what is the number one financial problem facing your family today? In 2024, the answer would have been 41% said high inflation. That number has come down in 2025, but it's still at a very high level. And then all the other things that are impacting consumers: cost of owning or renting a home, lack of money, low wages, healthcare costs. I bring this up because it does impact dairy sales. This is one of the best slides that I've seen about discussing consumers. All consumers aren't the same. This is breaking down the American consumer into quintiles. Quintiles means 20% segments. Now, the highest quintile of Americans are making about $200,000 or more as a family unit. They're only spending 8% of their income on food, but they're spending $17,000 on food each year. Very high-end retail. They're not. They're buying the foods they want. And then if you look at that lowest quintile of Americans, they're spending 32 to 33% of their income on food and only $5,300. Why is this important? Dairy farmers have benefited from beef on dairy, record prices for their beef on dairy calves. However, that also, on the reverse, impacts the consumer. Will I go to a quick service restaurant? Will I buy a hamburger? Will that hamburger have cheese on it? This is data from Pacer AI, and it shows year over year sales in certain restaurant categories. QSR and fast food would be like McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, fast food pizza chains. And this summer, you can see the consumer was really hitting the pocketbook, and sales were down in August and September 4%, while higher end consumers tend to go buy coffees and spend money in that category. Also, the sit down restaurants were doing strong. That did show an anomaly in the data this December, something to be aware of. My teammate Abby Prins and I put this together. This is data from 1909 to 2021, and it shows the shift in dairy product utilization. Prior to World War II, the top two dairy products were fluid milk and butter. In fact, back then Americans consumed 18 pounds of butter. Today, butter is having a renaissance, but we're only at 6.5 pounds. I don't ever see us returning probably that 18-pound mark. But the other point of this slide here is the strong and steady growth of the class 2, which is spoonable products. Think yogurt, cottage cheese, sour cream, whipping cream, dairy creamers would be in this category. And then, of course, class 3, which is cheese and whey. And they are now the market leaders. This past Friday, the CoBank Knowledge Exchange Division released a report on dairy proteins. In the dairy protein category, we have the ready-to-drink dairy protein shakes and nutritionals. Think Core Power. Think Muscle Milk now uses dairy ingredients. A new product called Nuri, N-U-R-R-I. And these are products that have 30 grams of dairy protein or more in them. And their sales in the last 4 years have moved from $4.7 billion to $8.1. It is a big and growing category. In this era, I always want to be cognizant that inflation is sometimes inflating these numbers because it costs more per unit. But even if we made this slide on total volume, this category is up 50% on unit sales in the last 4 years. Or 5 years. That's incredible. Also, from a dairy farm perspective, I want to, we talk about fluid milk sales being down or stagnant. These sales are not captured in the classic class 1 sales category. Much of the ingredients are class 2 and 4. So if you added this to the fluid class 1 beverage category, we'd be growing. Dairy exports are a big part of the story. We're exporting about 17% of our milk production. 2022 was the record year for the U.S. dairy industry and exports. 2025 is going to come close to challenging that record number. The category is being paced by cheese exports and butter exports. In fact, if you look at this data here, 2024 was a record export year. But when you look at 2025, keep in mind here, we still have 2 months of data that need to come in here. When we look at the butterfat category, largely when we talk butterfat in the export market, we're talking two things. We're talking butter, the product, and anhydrous milk fat. For almost the last 20-year window, if you measured U.S. dairy exports on a full fat basis with the butterfat in it, we were only exporting about 5% of our product. If we measured it on a skim solids basis, that means we skimmed the butterfat off. We were exporting 20%. Well, that data is going to be largely different this year because we've already exported 201 million pounds of butterfat and anhydrous milk fat, double of last year. Part of that's because we have an abundant supply of butterfat. Part of that is we are the lowest priced product amongst the big three, with the big three exporters in this order being the EU, New Zealand, and the United States. Let's take a deep dive into cattle inventory. The dairy cow herd is growing because dairy farmers are culling fewer cows. If you look back over the past, since Labor Day 2023, we have pulled back on culling by 530,000 head. How do we know that? At USDA federally inspected slaughter plants, we literally, there's inspectors, they'll say, oh, that's a Holstein cow, that's an Angus steer, that's a Jersey cow. So we have very good data we can compare back over different windows. This year, farmers in the last quarter of the year began culling a few more cows to the tune of about 24,000, but that does not erase any of the gains here or pullback on culling. And why is this taking place? It's largely for two big reasons. We have fewer heifer replacements leading in the bullpen here, or not the bullpen, but in the heifer pen. And also the value of the cow's uterus is more valuable for a beef on dairy calf in many instances than sending her for a cull right away. Genomics is changing the U.S. dairy industry. By my estimates, we have 20 to 25% of the newborn heifer calves being tested, and we instantly know about 70% of what that calf will do as a cow. I want to be very crystal clear here. I've spoken around the world, and including in China. The power of genomics is not the DNA sample. The power of genomics are the records that we have collected as a dairy industry over time. We have over 100 million records on milk production, butter fat, protein production, somatic cell count, productive life, fertility, and that is the predictive engine that helps us figure out which are the good heifer calves and which are the duds. Genomics came on the scene in 2008, and it first was really a science that we used to sort out the best bulls from the bad bulls. Now, in 2025, the last 6 months, we had 1 million genomic tests used largely on heifer calves. So this is being implemented on our dairy farms across the United States. I've been at CoBank now 3 years, and one of the first things I wanted to do when I got to CoBank was to put this on a dollar basis. I worked with the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, and this is over time. So in the pre-genomic era, 2000 to 2004, if you use the best 100 Holstein bulls on your females, you'd get about $13.38 a genetic gain. Remember, this was in the progeny test era. It would take 5 to 7 years to test out a bull. Progress was slow, but it was the best we have. Then we enter the early genomic era. That number moved to about $40. And then in those yellow bar eras, really when we started having a pace of change driven by shorter generation intervals in our bulls and picking the best ones more accurately, and more importantly, sorting out the duds and not using them. Now in the green bar era, we are really accelerating this technology, its use, and we're using it more and more on our heifer calves with each passing year. If you're not genomic testing, that's okay. You just got to be using the best bulls, but that genomic test will help accelerate your growth in a number of areas, and we'll talk through that shortly. Last year, I had the opportunity to present at the 101st USDA Ag Outlook Forum, and Jonathan Lamb, a New York dairyman, came with me to talk about the impact of genomics on his herd. Now, to be clear, Jonathan if we had a bell-shaped curve, he's out on that right tail. He's using in vitro fertilization. He's testing all his heifer calves, certainly using the top bulls. But if you look at this chart here, if you look at the 5th, 6th, and 7th lactation animals here, those look like Holsteins of yesteryear. And this is an all Holstein herd. You know, his oldest cows were at a 3.5 and a 3.2, 3.5 butterfat, 3.2 protein. And there's improvement. But if you look at the top of that chart, that PCTF, that's butterfat. His first lactation and second lactation cows are averaging 5% butterfat, and his 3.6 protein. I mean, this almost looks like jerseys from in the past, but this is how quickly genetics have changed milk production. In a conversation with the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, they're the ones that do genomic and genetic evaluations. 61% of the improvement in butterfat over the past decade has been genetics. We have a lot of tools in the toolbox also to improve butterfat from the nutrition and management standpoint. It could be feeding palm kernel oil. It could be feeding oleolinic soybeans that are roasted. In many other, could be cottonseed. However, when it comes to protein, we don't have as many tools in the toolbox, and 72% of the gain in protein has been genetics. Genetics is a investment we can make. We keep our offspring from our cows, and it's additive. When it comes to, and the other part of this technology and gain on the farm is the use of gender sorted semen or sex semen. That category from 2020 to 2024 has grown almost 3 million units in sales to the US dairy farmer. The conventional semen category, the traditional XY random heifer bull calf, dropped from 11.5 million units down to 6 million units. This change, when the 2025 data comes out, will only accelerate. The conventional unit of dairy semen will become the dodo bird of our industry. We will not be using much of it anymore. And then you'll all see the beef on dairy movement. We've gone from 4 million units used on dairy farms to 7.9 million the past 2 years. Drilling down to that data a little bit more, from 2000 to 2024, this is all beef bull semen sold in the United States. While it wasn't till recently we captured how much of that was going to dairy farmers, we intuitively knew that most of it was, because cattle ranchers out on the Western Range are not corralling their cows and breeding them AI. That's largely a natural service. When we look at let me start over on this one. When it comes to the collective beef industry in the United States, about 1 in 5 animals come from a dairy source. So where that could be a steer, it could be a cull cow, but these green bars is the shift in the industry. So blue bars were fed dairy type. That was straight Holstein or a straight Jersey. And now them green bars is projections from Cattle Facts on how many of these are crossbred animals from a beef sire and a dairy mama. This is a big impact to the Northeast milk shed, and I want to take a few moments to talk through it. Tomorrow, USDA will release its cattle report. However, one thing we did here at CoBank, we built a model to project how many heifers were going to be ready to enter the milking cow herd in the 2025, 2026, and 2027. And we can very accurately predict this based on semen sales. And in all those 3 categories we just talked about: conventional, gender sorted, and beef on dairy. So this new year here, we are expected to see 438,800 fewer dairy replacements to be available. That's because dairy farmers pivoted very hard to capture the beef on dairy category. In 2027, we expect to see 285,000 more dairy replacements compared to the previous year, because dairy farmers started using more gender sorted semen. Remember, we didn't use less beef semen, we just used more gender sorted semen to make a planned heifer calf. The other thing I want people to walk away from this slide, 285,000 does not wipe out the minus 438. So heifer replacements are going to remain tight for the foreseeable future. We'll see what happens when the sales data comes in this April. Let's look ahead to the dairy markets. I want to level set here, and we're going to talk beyond dairy. If you look at the far left, this is USDA data. The collective US agriculture had $127.8 billion of net farm income last year. Now, as we move through to the right and look at what happened in 2025, crop receipts were down 6.1 billion. Crop adjusted inventory was up 8.1. Animal products and receipts were up a whopping $30 billion, and just about all of that was in the beef category. Production expenses dropped a little bit, and then government payments were up 30.4 billion. So net farm income is going to be up this past year, 179.8 billion. However, only 2 categories are responsible for that: beef and government payments. That will impact what's going to take place in 2026. This drills down to the cattle and poultry category here. We're comparing 2022 to 2025, and you can see the cattle and calves category was up almost $130 billion, with dairy being down compared to that last 4-year category. Of course, the beef portion of dairy is over in that cattle and calves area. We have strong butterfat supplies, largely because the dairy cow herd is the largest in 30 years. We're at 9.567 million head. We're up 220,000 head from last year. And the number one reason we have more cattle is because the profit center on dairy farms is the beef on dairy calf. This is data down in Horizon Ag Country, but it's from Pennsylvania sale barns. And you can see that beef on dairy calf was worth about $200. And then the demand and tight supplies came about here. We're back up to almost $1,400 per calf. And that one blip on the far right when it dropped was because of a plant closing announcement. However, that category has rebounded quite a bit. This growth in the dairy cow herd has caused milk production and butterfat and protein to shift. If we look at the first 5 months of the last year, butterfat was up 3.4, protein 2.7, and milk just up 1.3. Then the buildup of the dairy cow herd began because largely to capture revenue from beef on dairy. Butterfat was up a whopping 5.6%, protein up 4.9%, and milk 3.6%. And if you look at the last 2 months of the year, for the first time in this component run, protein grew at slightly faster pace than butterfat. If you look at this on a line chart here, you can see that protein was up 6.2% in December milk supply, and butterfat was up 5.8%. This is very important with strong butter or fat supplies and demand for protein. Will this trend continue? Is this a sign that some rations are being adjusted to put in less feed ingredients to make butterfat? We will see. Again, when I come back to the milk check, I strongly believe that protein will be the leading pay category in your milk checks in 2026. Why are milk prices down? Number one reason, we have more cows in the United States. But let's look at this at the global level. Global dairy trade, GDT, prices, this auction takes place in New Zealand the first and third Tuesday of every month. We had a record 9 auctions go in a row go down. And then in early January, prices were up 6.1%, and we had another auction that was up. So we may have seen the bottom of the milk prices. And I'm going to show you a couple other reasons why I believe that. The second reason behind our milk prices being down and having too much butter fat, number one, is more cattle in the US, dairy cows specifically, but EU has grown its milk production as well. Since the EU quotas went away in 2014, this year, 2025, has seen the most growth. And in fact, it's been late this summer. October milk production was up 5.6% in the EU, and the preliminary data shows another 5%. When you look at Germany, Germany's growth was up over 6%. Why does Germany matter? Germany is the California of Europe. It's the largest milk production region. We're going to look at class 4 futures, and then the next slide is going to look at class 3 futures. And these are the same contracts. So the blue line here is August 1 trading, class 4 being butter and powder, largely representative of the West Coast market, but it was all over $19. Then the strong butter fat supplies put downward pressure on the milk prices. And you can see starting the new year, futures from January to July were at 13 and barely creeped over $15 range. But I think we maybe seen the markets bottom out. And we're going to look at yesterday's data here that I updated, and you can see the contracts have begun to improve. We're at $16 to $17 range for class 4 milk. Similar story in class 3. We were running about the high 17 range to $18 on August 1. Then when you look at CME trading on January 9th, earlier this month, we were down in the $15 range with some recovery later in the year. As cheese has bounced back a little bit, we've seen some improvement in the CME. One thing I want you to walk away with here, some of these prices aren't glorious. However, risk mitigation is so important. My father passed away 7 years ago, so I'm also running the farm on our 400 cow dairy. Personally, I type in the opening bell and the closing bell at the end of the day for soybean, corn, and wheat futures, because I got to watch the market. And a few days ago, I made a decision when I could get $10 delivered soybeans. I sold some new crop soybeans just to take some risk off the table. Is it a great price? No, but knowing your cost of production can help. Whey values keep growing, driven by consumer demand. This is the kind of what I call the entry level whey prices. This is dry whey at 34%. You can see that category was strong to end the year. If you look at the far right, December, the black line there was quite high. And then the dots on the far left starts out this new year. Then the next category of whey would be milk protein concentrate. That's kind of 50 to 80% protein, and then whey protein isolates, which are selling at $12.50 a pound. The question is how much upside is in that category. I think we have a lot more run on that. And of course, the way to get whey is to make cheese. So we're going to still see investment in cheese processing plants. I want to finish this presentation here with a look at the bigger picture, a look at the big exporters. So here we're looking at the New Zealand, the European Union, and the United States. This is from a report that was published by the Knowledge Exchange Division at CoBank. If you want a deeper dive, just Google CoBank and KED, K-E-D, and you'll find these reports. Let's look under the dairy section. What you can walk away here is when it comes to genetics and genomics, we have a lot of upside. New Zealand is averaging 5% butterfat. Now, 60% of their cows are a Kiwi cross, which is Jersey Holsteins, and then another 20% are Holstein. And then in recent years, the United States and Canada passed the European Union. Now, you're going to ask me, why did Mr. Geiger put on Canada on this slide? Now, they're not a major exporter, but what they are, we share a genetic base with the United States and Canada. So I wanted to see, is the trends also taking place in Canada as they are in the US? And the answer is yes. And the Canadian dairy herd is 93% Holsteins. If I would have to peg a number here in the US, we're probably between 82 and 85%. Then when you look at protein content in the milk, New Zealand, again, a nation that exports 95% of their milk production, they get paid on kilograms of milk solids. That means the solids is so very valuable, they want to export dry products. They're over 4% protein. The European Union has a nice protein level at 3.4, and you can see the change in the US and Canada is almost on top of each other. The next slide here is a ginormous but. While we need to celebrate the growth in components in the United States, there's an issue. To make good cheese, you need a protein to fat ratio of 0.8. You can see that the United States has dropped significantly and Canada has dropped even more. In fact, we're under 0.78. What does this mean to farm gate milk leaving your farm? It means when it gets to a cheese plant, and remember, 40 to 45% of the US milk supply goes into cheese. So even if you're not in a milk shed that makes cheese, this impacts you because a cheesemaker will have to do some separation. That means pulling off sweet cream because they can't put that all in the cheese. If the fat content gets too high in cheese, it doesn't slice right. It impacts quality. The other issue is then cheesemakers are also buying milk protein concentrate and ultra filtered milk, which is a lot of protein, and putting it in cheese vats, or they can use non-fat dry milk. These are all protein sources. So we're putting protein sources into cheese vats to make good cheese, and that drives up the price of protein. It drives up the cost of processing. It makes our milk a little less valuable. One key takeaway, we need to make more protein. Chad Deckow, Penn State geneticist, who I'm good friends with, had a wonderful article in the January 10, 2026 Horde's Dairyman. He looked at the milk protein to fat ratios in the U.S. dairy breeds. You can see that Jersey has always been lower on that ratio, and that's why many plants that use a lot of Jersey milk will be making American-style cheeses, such as cheddar. But now the protein to fat ratio has shifted in the Holsteins, largely because the Holstein breed has gotten very good at genetic selection and making more butterfat. Chad in his article suggests that we should have a new trait, the protein to fat ratio. And when we talk about protein in butterfat, earlier I said 62% of the contemporary gains for butterfat have been genetics, and that number climbs to nearly 72% for protein. The issue in the Holstein breed right now is we have far more variation in butterfat, and you can see that in the yellow bars. That means we can change it quickly because we use those bowls on the right, we can move it faster. The blue bars are protein. We have less variation within the breed, and it's a little harder to make really fast progress. However, this is an area that we need to be very vigilant on, and there's opportunity here. And remember, even if we change sire selection today, it's almost like moving an ocean liner. We have about 4 years to even see the impact because we make the calf 9 months for birth, and then at least 2 more years before she hits the milking string. And then we first got to collect her milk. Looking at the margins to make milk right now, this was, I forgot to update this chart here. This was based on the early January margins on the CME. They've improved some. But if you look at November 2023, we had slightly higher feed prices. We were looking at $4.65 bushel corn, $4.65 ton per ton soybean meal, and prices have dropped quite a bit on the feed category. These prices should prevail barring a drought for quite a while. We're producing too much corn in this country, too much soybeans, and our only options here right now, if we don't have a growing population, and we certainly don't right now with the immigration enforcement taking place, we either have to export it or use more biofuels. For dairy farmers, it's a buyer's market on the feed side, and it's another reason that we can pencil out keeping some cows longer to get that beef on dairy calf. So my key 3 themes here today is dairy is a growing food category. There's a lot of opportunity here. Dairy proteins are in strong demand. I mean, if you think about the new food pyramid that came out, I mean, the protein intake would almost be like I need to eat 2 steaks a day or 4 chicken breasts, or I can eat a lot of dairy protein. And dairy protein is still cheaper than a lot of the meats. We're having historic growth in milk components, and I think we're going to continue to see that, and for good reasons. It's showing up in the milk check. And lastly, beef brings more to dairy. So I'm going to pause there and stop sharing my screen, and we will turn it over to Megan.
Great. Thank you so much, Corey. That was great insight as to where the industry is going and what's driving markets right now. I am going to wrap up our webinar with some key takeaways and action items, and we're going to do questions at the end. So please feel free to keep sending those in. I've seen several come in already. So try to get my screen shared, and it looks like we're good. All right. So what we heard from Corey, at least some of my takeaways, was that demand, especially for protein, is very strong. Investment in processing is historic, and there are some real growth opportunities ahead in the dairy industry, which is certainly very exciting. However, at the same time, we are also dealing with oversupplied butterfat, volatile milk prices, shifting component values, and there's also a growing reliance on beef revenue, which Corey clearly showed. My goal the next few minutes as we wrap up here is just to talk about taking Corey's outlook and turning that into an action plan for your farm, specifically how risk management fits into planning for 2026 and protecting revenue in an environment where volatility really has become the new normal, unfortunately. So as we think about planning for 2026, risk management becomes a core piece of that conversation. One thing Corey highlighted very clearly was that volatility isn't going away. We're seeing it in milk prices, in component values, in exports, and even in beef markets. Short-term swings can be large and they happen very quickly in today's industry. That means that farms can't rely on just average price years anymore. Planning needs to account for volatility as a permanent feature in today's market. So for 2026, planning really comes down to protecting revenue, not maximizing prices this year, not chasing the top of the market this year, unfortunately, but protecting enough revenue so the business stays stable, cash flow remains predictable, which is certainly needed with current milk prices. But with that, risk management is ultimately about stability. It helps smooth income through price cycles, supports long-term decision-making, and really gives farms the confidence to move forward with maybe investments, growth, or simply just maintaining a strong operation. So there are several tools available to protect against market movements, price fluctuations, and also rising costs. Some of those programs include dairy margin coverage, DMC, dairy revenue protection, DRP, livestock gross margin, livestock risk protection, which is a newer option for dairy producers, and also traditional hedging strategies using futures and options. But the key is really just matching the right tools with your specific needs in your operation. One of the more popular tools is dairy revenue protection. Unlike some more traditional risk management tools, DRP allows for greater customization to meet every farm's unique needs. The program is on a quarterly basis, and it really just allows producers to set a price floor while leaving all of the upside of the market open. Dairy producers can decide when to set prices, how much milk production to protect within the program as well. DRP can be tailored to every type of operation, no matter how big or how small as well. But really, at its core, DRP just provides a safety net for producers. It really just ensures that even if the market takes an unexpected dip, you'll have some revenue stability to cover costs and ultimately maintain your operation. As Corey mentioned, beef revenue has been an absolute game changer. In some cases, beef income now represents a meaningful portion of total farm revenue. This chart is from Marin Bozic, and it estimates that it will add about $5 per hundredweight or more to dairy revenue this year. That just means it also represents risk exposure that needs to be managed and protected as it is a significant piece of income. So there is some new program additions to the livestock risk protection program that allows dairy producers to protect a price floor on cattle. So that includes dairy beef cross calves, beef calves, and cull cows. Current calf prices producers can protect range over $1,400 per calf, depending on the month. LRP is also customizable. Coverage is on a monthly basis, and it's really just designed, again, to protect that income. As beef revenue becomes more important, protecting that revenue stream becomes just as important as protecting your milk. And you can see on that chart there, and Corey showed this as well, that cattle prices are back near record highs. Understanding the tools available like DRP and LRP that we just went over are really just one piece of this risk management puzzle. The next piece is thinking holistically. So what I mean by that is, how do we use these tools to build resilience and create a strong foundation for your business? A strong risk management plan can help your operation navigate uncertainties and market shifts like we're clearly seeing today. It also stabilizes income during uncertain periods. It supports diversification strategies like beef on dairy. It adapts to changing trade and policy environments, and it also encourages proactive financial planning rather than just some reactive decision making. Risk management isn't about reacting to the challenges that we're facing, it's about anticipating them and preparing for them. But ultimately, all of those pieces there work together to strengthen dairy farmers' resilience. As we plan for 2026, risk management should be a part of the broader business strategy. It's important to have a really structured approach to risk management. And as we wrap up here shortly, I wanted to provide you with a roadmap and really just some simple steps on how to go about doing that. So a strong risk management plan follows a really clear process. First, understand the tools available, some of which we just touched on. Then assess your risk beyond milk. So that may include components, beef, and other aspects of your operation. Develop mitigation strategies, implement them, budget for them, and review them regularly as the markets change. Also, keep in mind that risk management is an ongoing process and it can be changed over time. So make sure you regularly evaluate your strategy to ensure that it remains effective and meets the goals of your operation. Another part of planning for this year is remembering important dates for these tools. So the USDA recently announced the sign-up deadline for dairy margin coverage, which is February 26th. Make sure you sign up at your local Farm Service Agency office. The Dairy Revenue Protection and Livestock Risk Protection programs also have some deadlines. If you don't have a policy, you can sign up at any point throughout the year. If you do have a policy currently, the deadline to transfer to Farm Credit East is June 30th. And then lastly, another tool for managing feed prices and other business risk is spring crop insurance. And the deadline to sign up for that is quickly approaching on March 15th. A way to stay up to date on important deadlines, in addition to the knowledge exchange QR code that Corey had, is our Dairy Market Insights newsletter. So this is our newsletter that is sent weekly to help dairy producers and the industry stay up to date on evolving market conditions, important deadlines, and risk management tools. And if you scan that QR code, it will bring you to this page on our Farm Credit East website to sign up for that. If you missed the QR code, feel free to scan it here as well. But to wrap up, here's an actionable plan to ensure your farm is ready for 2026. Again, go through that roadmap that we went over, but as a takeaway, I'd really encourage everyone to identify gaps in your current strategy, maybe evaluate what's working and adjust where needed. Put a plan in place that is proactive and aligns with your goals, which maybe could include some of those tools that we just went over. And then also coordinate with your advisory team. Risk management is most effective when it's part of a broader conversation with your lenders, your consultants, family members, tax preparers, and important business partners. Lastly, our website, farmcrediteast.com, has more information on the programs that we went over, as well as contact information for risk management agents across our territory. But again, thank you for tuning in today. We'll open it up for questions now, and Corey and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'll stop sharing my screen here. It looks like we have several questions coming in, Corey. All right, the first one is the fat and protein data from Oakfield a rolling average or from a single test?
Those are completed lactations. So that's the whole lactation data for the year.
Perfect. Another question, which maybe both you and I can answer, Corey. The question is, I'd be interested to hear any thoughts on long-term milk prices that could be used for budgeting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know, I've been making a number of presentations in the last 2 weeks here. The thing to keep in mind about milk prices and projections, they are dynamic. I think one of the big things is that I would encourage people to do, watch the CME futures markets for class 3 and for milk. They're very big indicators of where markets are going long term. That being said, you can see the shifts because the United States, what's changed here, in the past decade, we're exporting with 17% of our milk. We also have to keep an eyeball on what's happening in the European Union and what's happening in New Zealand, because those impact markets too. If your EU milk production would have stayed flat, we wouldn't have seen hardly any of those shifts in the CME when I did that comparison in August, early January, and what's taking place right now. I mean, USDA makes projections too on the whole milk price, or all milk price, but these market forecasts are very dynamic. Last year, I was projecting that we'd have an oversupply of butterfat. The issue was you don't exactly know when that will impact the market. It could have been July, it could have been August, it could have been December, and it got accelerated because EU milk was suddenly up 5.6%. So my big thing is I really, on my crop farm, I watch the prevailing futures markets long term, and they change.
Absolutely. Feel free to keep sending questions in here. The next question is, do you know how much milk was covered under DRP prior to the recent milk price decline? I would say on average, it's between 20 to 30% of U.S. milk production is covered under DRP quarterly, and that can range, depending on where prices are at and such.
Yeah, and when you add DRP, that's perfect, right answer, Megan. When you add DRP and DMC together, we're probably talking about 50 to 55% of the U.S. milk supply being covered by those two signature insurance programs. I think for the dairy farmers out in the audience, when you're thinking about this too, I've had a number of meetings virtually with some European counterparts, and these risk mitigation tools are not available in Europe. Not on the dairy side, not on the beef side, not much on the crop side. We are fortunate in the United States to have some of these great tools available, and I encourage you to make use of them. My brother-in-law is a full-time dairy farmer, and we talk daily, almost every other day on this. Sometimes the prices are what I call jumping up and down about, excited that I'm going to lock them in, but pulling off some of the risk off our operation is important. And if you lock in some of your milk price or insure it, you also got to look at the other side of the equation, your costs, whether it be feed or other things. I pre-purchased some of my fuel needs for this spring because right now the fuel prices look pretty darn good. I don't know what's going to happen in the geopolitical politics between now and spring planting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another question we have here, what about more on European numbers? If they keep increasing, how will that impact producers here in the U.S.?
Mm-hmm. That's a really important question. And if the European Union exports 20% of their milk production in terms of dairy products and ingredients, and they're 1.6 times the U.S. milk shed, it will have a significant impact. The question is, if we're getting, if the slide that Megan showed, if we're going to push past $5 per hundredweight equivalent on beef on dairy, the Europeans are having some experience in positivity with this too, but I would say their calf prices, their beef calf and dairy calf prices are half the value they are in the U.S. So we would more naturally predict a pullback on milk production there because the margins on making milk will feel the impact quicker because we won't have that extra beef revenue. But it is certainly something to keep an eye on because it will impact us.
Thank you.
Megan, and jump in real quick. For those of you that are on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. I make posts weekly on some of these market situations as well. And if you want to have some of these things up to date, you can see them there.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Another question just came in for you. So for a while, it looked like the national dairy herd was slowly turning brown. Are current market conditions causing a reversal? Butterfat values are down and beef markets seem to favor Angus crosses from Holstein cows.
It's a big question and an important question as well. We did see the Jerseys had made some significant growth in their population for a variety of reasons, and the market number one was demanding butterfat. We were clamoring for butterfat. We were clamoring for butterfat. Then came the beef on dairy movement, and well, let's stop. I'm going to stop there too. The other thing is the Holstein cow's fertility began to improve. In my past life at Hordes Dairyman, I was very involved in the Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. And, when that awards program started, if you found a Holstein herd at 21, 22% preg rate, they'd be in the running for an award. They wouldn't even be nominated anymore. So you had that shift. Then came beef on dairy, and calf buyers, they can easily tell the difference between a beef on dairy calf from a Holstein cow and a Jersey cow. And out on the West Coast, I know there's a number of Jersey farms that are not only using gender sorted semen on their best heifers and cows, but some are now putting native beef embryos into their cows to capture more revenue on the beef on dairy. Because of all these things, I think in the significant growth in milk components in the Holstein breed, we're seeing the Holstein percentage of the U.S. dairy herd grow again. The other thing I'd add to that too, when I put those slides on for New Zealand, the European Union, and Canada, when I was in the U.S., when I was comparing growth in butterfat and protein, we in North America have more ability to use genomics than in other regions. If you look at the European milk shed, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands have a lot of Holsteins, but when you get to France, there's a lot of Mark Billiards, there's a lot of Flickvies, there's a lot of Normandys. You get to the Scandinavian countries, there's a lot of Swedish Red. And these smaller populations have less data records to fuel genomic predictions, and that impacts progress as well.
Thank you. Questions keep flowing in here as we're heading up to 1 this afternoon. But the next question is, if knowing that genetic gains strongly impact protein components, outpacing butterfat, is the next area for gains for improving protein leaning towards improved homegrown forages? And to clarify, if maxed out genetically, how do producers then try to improve protein components?
Let me be real clear. We're not maxed out genetically. If you took and if I misspoke, I apologize. I'm saying we need to double down on protein selection. If you took all of the SNPs of the best cows, there's 32 chromosomes on a dairy cow. The top Holstein bull right now is maybe 1,300 net merit. I don't have the exact number, but just for purposes of relationship. And then you made a super cow, like you took all the best genes. That cow would be like $5,800 net merit. That means we have a ton of upside on the genetic selection here. So, no, we have a lot of ability to do that. Last year, I spent a lot of, I at least had 3 meetings with different feed suppliers. First question was, is the demand for milk components going to continue to grow? After showing a couple slides on consumer trends, the answer is yes in that category. Then the next question is, how do we get more tools in the toolbox to improve protein? We have a lot of feeding options there, especially for those in the nutritionists in the audience. We don't have as many economical, and the key word here is economical feeding options to boost protein levels as we do have for butterfat. So right now, that's why that 72% number is out there, that 72% of the gain in protein has been genetics, because it is by far the best tool we have right now. The world will change in that regard. We will have more options, I predict, in the future. They're not all here yet.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. A lot to look forward to in the dairy industry for sure. With that, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think we can wrap up here. But Corey, very much appreciate your insight today. It was great to hear your perspective and where the dairy industry is going. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to use the Contact Us form on the Farm Credit East website or reach out to us directly. So thank you all for your time today and tuning in to our Outlook. We really appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone.